Thank you, Rich. Not only has Rich had me follow Alvaro and Tom, but he's put me as the last thing standing between you all and lunch. So I'm sorry, Rich. Whatever it is that I've done, I'm sorry. If you're asking why Rich has chosen me to speak about patience, it is because I am the perfect model of this virtue. And you can ask anyone besides my wife, my children, or pretty much anyone that knows me in any capacity. In fact, when I told my teenage son that I would be giving this talk, he said, quote, "That is the most ironic thing I have ever heard." Which was slightly more eloquent than my teenage daughter's reaction, which was just uncontrollable laughter. On another occasion, when I told my wife that I'd be giving this talk, she said, "Well, that's certainly a topic you've had to think a lot about." So I will be bringing my experience as a father with all my flaws and failures in this regard to this talk. Also, the experience of my own upbringing, as all of us have done. Blessed as I was with a great father. But also, and maybe more importantly, in my professional experience, my position of guiding lower school teachers for the past 10 years, and the hundreds, the thousands of interactions and students that we've had to deal patiently with, and all of their failures and all of their flaws. And often the question comes in the form of, from the teacher, am I being too harsh? Am I being too lenient? He's driving me crazy, I'm exploding, or I'm not correcting enough, I feel, not getting hard enough on him, not strict enough. And so there's this vacillating between the two extremes, it seems. And I think this happens to us as dads a lot as well, where we catch ourselves and we look back in the rear view of our recent interactions with our sons and their failures, and we see sort of a trail of unsuccessful responses. We've either we've called them on it and we've gone too far, or we haven't called them on it and we see that hasn't led to a good result either. So my first suggestion is that we actually reframe that question, right? We know that the mistakes are going to be there, the failures are going to be there. And the question I think is more helpful is, how do I consistently respond well to my son's failures? Right? Consistently responding well to my son's failures. Because we're not just, it'd be great if we were these sort of artists just kind of sculpting and molding our sons out of nothing. In a way, it would almost be easier to kind of construct this being that we think to be so good. But we're involved with all of the beautiful and messy and mysterious and frustrating things that human nature brings along, certainly in the form of our sons as they grow, when they're young and when they're older. So I think maybe the first question for the self-reflection, I'm going to be referring to that, as Alvaro mentioned, this self-reflection is so important as fathers, to ask, where do I stand on this scale? Typically, right? Because sometimes we'll be on either end depending on the situation. But do I tend to overdo it? I tend to kind of give in to my impulse of anger and overdo the correction? Or am I on the side of not correcting enough and wishing I had said something or called them out on it? Have the feeling that things are just kind of out of control and there's not enough discipline and there's not enough manners, the obedience isn't there. Where do I stand? And in my experience with guiding teachers, we men fall on both sides of that. I would say it's probably more frequent that we fall on the side of impulsive and anger and struggling with patience in that way. But I would like to start with that place because I think that instead of concentrating on patience to begin, it's important to think about anger and understand anger in the right way. It should be noted that anger is not an objective evil. Right? When St. Paul talks about evil, he says, do not sin in your anger. He does not say, do not be angry. The the anger comes, and we don't have any control of that. It's a passion. It's an emotion. And emotions are neither morally good nor morally bad. It's what we do with them. So that anger is going to be there. And what is the purpose of this anger? I mean, we need it. In fact, not only do we need it, but St. John Chrysostom says that unreasonable patience, not having anger in certain situations, is the hotbed of many vices. It fosters negligence and incites not only the wicked, but even the good to do wrong. I've often thought about memorizing that and bringing it out to my wife when I've had one of my explosions as a get-out-of-jail-free card, but I wouldn't recommend that. But it's important to note that it is needed. It's not only, sometimes it's necessary. Anger in the moral realm, in the character development realm, it would be akin to like pain in the physical realm. It's an indicator. It's an alarm, and it tells us something is off here. Anger is some type of sensor within us that says an injustice has been done. Now, the difficulty comes in that we don't often have that regulated well, and the alarm is way louder than it needs to be. And so that's where patience comes in. But I do think that that's a good place to begin, that anger is not the problem. Anger is not the problem. It's what we do with our anger. I think sometimes let ourselves off the hook and just say, wow, I'm just so angry and I just flew off the handle, as if we didn't have any control of it. But we do. Our will is still there intact, and it's what our will consents to that leads us astray, either the manner or the content of our words or reactions. And so we do need that anger. It's kind of like, think about it like a guard dog, a well-trained guard dog, right? I mean, we wouldn't want our guard dog to just be sleeping in the corner when a thief breaks in. But at the same time, we don't want to just, if the dog is going crazy and snarling and the doorbell ringing, we wouldn't want to just open the door because, the poor pizza guy might just get it, We got to be our anger should be a well-trained guard dog, letting us know something's here, and then we be master of it, our reason be master of that anger, and decide what we do with it. So how should we respond? Well, that's where the virtue of patience comes in. As Aristotle and St. Thomas tells us, virtue is a stable disposition of the mind that leads us to the good, to right action. And finding the balance in between extremes, right? It's found in the mean. And incidentally, what St. Thomas calls patience is actually that virtue that moderates sorrow. And so we can see that being really necessary as our sons get older and they make big mistakes. And we might need that patience to moderate the sorrow and the sadness of those failures. The virtue that moderates anger is meekness. And it's, I think, worth noting that is one of the few virtues that our Lord gives to himself, assigns to himself. So it's certainly a good one. But I think for the intentions of this talk, we can just wrap up patience as constituting both of those. Plus, persistent meekness didn't have the same ring to it. So that's good editing on Rich's part. Okay, so what I'd like to do is just talk about what happens when our sons mess up, their failures. We're not going to avoid them altogether. And I think, again, it's kind of looking at what are we after? What are the goods that can come about from this interaction? And I've thought of 5 that we can kind of have as objectives for our interactions, our responses to the failures, the mistakes of our sons. The first is a practical remedy, because the failure is often going to be something that has gone wrong in a sort of physical or earthly way. And so we need a practical remedy to whatever that problem is that our son has got a spill or that kind of thing. The second is justice. So now in the moral realm, bringing about some type of apology that he needs to make or amendment to his wrong. The third, and distinct from justice, is discipline, that he needs to learn not only just bring about justice from that injustice, but also learn for going forward, for his future education. There's an educative aspect to our responses, in each of our responses, and we should be trying to bring that to bear. The fourth good is peace. Can we have this response in an atmosphere of calm, right? Can our manner be such that our volume, our tone of voice creates and keeps that atmosphere of peace in the home? And then fifth, trust. How can this response, how can my response now make the next interaction that I have with my son more effective? How can this, what I'm doing right now, serve my next conversation or my next correction? And I think that's a really important one. I'm going to suggest that on a typical basis, most of us stop at number 2. We come up with a practical remedy, and we want to bring about justice because we are men, and it's in our DNA to come up with a solution. There's a problem here. There's, the spill on the floor or on the table. We're problem solvers, and our senses of justice is pretty refined, and so we want to bring about whatever justice is necessary. I'd say the other 3, discipline, and peace and trust, only will happen if we're intentional about those 3. I think it needs to be something that we've planned on and that we've kind of worked into this stable disposition of patience going into our responses when our sons fail. Well, that sounds great, Colin, but, in the moment when things have really hit the fan, I'm not really going to go through this, checklist of goods, right? We're not going to have time for that. Totally understandably. That's why I would like to now, in this portion of the talk, kind of go through a moment, right? Because those are what we're really concerned with. That's where the rubber hits the road for us dads and our sons when something goes wrong. And I'm going to frame this in order of time, right? Before the moment, during the moment, after the moment, and I even have a category for beyond the moment. So this is just going to be a sampling of ideas, not an exhaustive checklist that we need to go through, or we all need to run through every time something happens. If something works, or you can take one thing away that resonates with you, great. If you can't, blame Rich. So we're going to start with before. And actually, it's worth noting that most of the work is in this category. Most of my suggestions are going to be beforehand, the preventative patience. Okay, so before, I think the first suggestion I would have is anticipate and identify our moments. We each know what those scenarios are where we tend to have patterns of losing our patience or the discipline not happening the way it should, right? And we can all have our own moments. It could be driving on, late for church, or, getting ready for school in the morning, right? Think about these scenarios and take it to the self-reflection that Alvaro was suggesting, that we go through and think about how to do this better, but anticipating it, right? Going into a store with our toddlers, that kind of thing. I'm going to give one that, for me, it's not super regular, but it's one that just kind of came to mind, and I call it the Sunday afternoon routine. And this happens when, if my wife has gone out of town for the weekend, and I remember this as a boy too, when my mom would go out of town for the weekend, but now as a dad, and my wife goes home for the weekend, she's coming home probably around Sunday evening, and I wake up Sunday morning and think, I will literally need every minute between now and when she comes home to clean this house. And my kids are here, and I need to get them to help me, and we are going to be rushing. I mean, the pizza boxes are still on the counter from Friday night. The Lego minefield is in full effect. The couch cushions are there for WrestleMania from the night before. I mean, I've been tempted at times to want to make it look like someone just broke in and vandalized the place, because that would be less work than actually cleaning it. But what do we have going against us in this moment, or me going against me? I've got a job to do, and it's not educating you, my sons. It is getting this task accomplished. And I think that is an obstacle often to our patience, because our attention gets fully diverted to male-minded, get this job done. And everything else is going to just be burned in its wake of getting this job done. That's an obstacle. Second, time. We're under pressure. We're under some type of anxiety. Could be time, could be something else. In this case, it's time. And then also the visible mess, which is a stressor, right? All these things coming to, well, I think it's good. Sometimes we kind of run in bullish and headlong into that moment saying, let's get it done, let's get it done, let's get it done. I would recommend stopping before even the moment happens and saying, this is a likely scenario for me to lose my patience. This, identify and anticipate, right? Jason Bourne walking into a room, he sees the sniper on the roof, he sees the minefield, his mind's going like this. This is what we have to do as dads when this potential scenario is coming our way. Anticipate it, give ourselves the help of this moment that could explode soon. And then we got to set proper expectations for ourselves, secondly, right? For ourselves, set proper expectations. The way I encourage my soccer players to visualize the game that is about to happen. It's an important part of game preparation. We could work this into our fathering, to our parenting, right? With our sons, thinking about, okay, if this happens, how can I respond? Of course, it's not going to be able to take into consideration all things that potentially happen. But we also want to set proper expectations for our sons, right? The key is knowing that they're going to make a mistake. I mean, when we have this job to do and I want my sons to help me, I have to realize I'm working with a highly unqualified staff. Right? And the trick is communicating to them, I trust you to do it. But knowing inside they are not going to do it well. They're going to make mistakes. There's going to be something. And the inverse is often what is the mentality we take on. That's an art form. That takes practice. Thirdly, in the preparation stage is the pregame huddle. And this is a concrete tactic that I have used a lot, certainly before going shopping with my toddlers or into a situation like this. Lay out very specific ground rules. Don't make a ton of them, make a few. The most important, the ones that you know they're going to be tempted to break the most. No grabbing that food off the shelf. No, if you want something, you got to ask for it. Couple of quick, simple rules, and you can even lay out consequences that will happen should they break those ground rules. And what this does is it saves us from doing a lot of on our toes thinking in the moment. And that's where we often get tripped up. Where something happens, they do something, and then we got to think, oh, what is the right consequence? What am I going to say right here? We've already prepped ourselves and them for that moment. I remember that just having this type of talk with my 4-year-old who was having a really hard time with tantrums. And I told him, this crying's got to stop. And I just told him, the next time I hear you cry tonight, I'm going to go, I'm having a drink with your mom in the living room. If I hear you cry again, you're going to your room. So I go in, and of course I hear him throwing a tantrum 5 minutes later, and I get up, and my anger's going, and Nicole, she said, just don't say anything, just bring him up to his room. Right, like Tom said, sometimes our wives have to be our patients, but I set that ground rule with him, and then I didn't have to do any thinking when I went in there. And not only did I not have to do any thinking, but he understood what I was doing and why, because it was already laid out for him. All right, so then during the moment, that's before the moment happens. What about during the moment? I'm cleaning, getting everything ready. I've given the kids instructions. We've done the pregame huddle, and bam, you hear from the other room that distinct sound of expensive destruction. Something has gone seriously wrong. Rich told me I have 5 children. 4 of them are boys. My oldest son is a freshman in college. My second son is a junior in high school. My third son is a kindergartner. And my youngest son is a maniacal savage. He, in his short 4 years of life, has already claimed a phone, an iPad, and 2 TVs to his list of destruction. He's not only a maniac, he's also a Luddite, apparently. And in this moment, what do? We hear this bang, and it's, our anger, we can feel it. It's like this invisible thing just taking over us from the inside. Our fingers start to tingle. You ever notice you walk differently when you're angry? There's weird things happen. And you're heading over. Thomas Jefferson, the great Stoic that he was, said, if you're angry, don't speak for 10 seconds. If you're really angry, don't speak for 100 seconds. That might work for you. That doesn't work for me. I mean, I've got to have something a little bit more, I guess, more meaningful than that. And for me, it can't be specific. Like Alvaro said, every time is going to be a little bit different. But what I would try to do myself is try to marshal my reason, muster the reason, the intellect, over my passion at that moment. What does that mean? Well, it just, I think, again, we have this unhealthy relationship with our anger where we say, tamp it down, tamp it down, tamp it down, silence it, it shouldn't exist, or it's an explosion where it's a raging fire. Instead, acknowledge my anger is letting me know something is seriously off here. And I think that mental acknowledgement is important for us to do. And then what am I going to do with that? So just make our intellect, give it its proper place over that passion in that moment. 2, don't rush it. Can we ask ourselves, can this wait? Because it'll probably be better if it waits most of the time. Not always, we can't always, and sometimes it's got to be handled right away. But St. Paul's saying, don't let the sun go down in your anger. We shouldn't take that literally, right? We don't have to take that literally. Right? Sometimes it's good to wait to handle this the next day when passion is not there. And then, just kind of, I think the best way I had to think of this or put this into words was attack with affection. What do I mean? Our anger is there. There's this void, right? And it's not just a negative, patience is not just a negative holding off a force, but rather what are we supplanting in its place? And that, I would suggest, could be affection, going beyond what you think is necessary, being affectionate with our son who's made that mistake can go a long way. So that's during, and then after this moment, we need to assess, how did we do? Again, kind of getting back to the self-reflection that Alvaro had, whether it's talking it out with your wife or, in front of the tabernacle, how did this moment go? All right, it's the game film, watching the game film afterwards. Oh, I shouldn't have made that pass. That was silly. I can't believe I made that. Looking at it in our minds. And making, this is not just so that we can act now better or feel properly guilty for it, whatever. It's so that we can make a good plan of attack for the next scenario that is like this one. Right? St. Thomas called this our consequent conscience, and its purpose is to educate our future action. And so we want to initiate that and apologize, like Tom said, if necessary. Right? That can go a long way, not only emotionally in repairing any wounds that our impatience or our anger might have caused, but even intellectually in your son. We apologize and we say, I shouldn't have said this, or I shouldn't have said it in this way, but not that you didn't do anything wrong. Here's how I should have responded, and say that, and that can be very helpful and educative to them. Beyond the moment, right, before, during, and after, beyond the moment is where we just build the capital with our sons of when we have these moments, it makes it so much easier. And this I would encourage, and you might think this is kind of beyond the scope of patience itself, but I think it really has helped in my self-reflection with my sons when I have exercised some of the things Alvaro mentioned, taken my son out to lunch, not done this work that I needed to do, but go, do something fun with my little sons. That has made the next interaction more effective. even if it's a really difficult, potentially volatile situation. Something that's out of the ordinary, something that communicates your true love and affection for him. And those moments, as Alvaro already mentioned, provides great venue for coaching. And finally, it's just good for us to remember the necessity of grace. In fact, St. Thomas, when talking about patience, he devotes an entire question of the Summa Theologia to, is patience possible without grace? And he comes to the conclusion that it's not. Right, like Father James was mentioning, this advice, these tactics, these principles are great. We've got to have the grace in the moment to help us and to lead us, because those moments can be so difficult. So again, not only the supernatural grace, but the grace we give ourselves, the human grace of just knowing that, okay, our sons are going to make mistakes. We know we're going to make mistakes. We are going to make these mistakes. We're going to lose our temper every once in a while. We're going to let something slide maybe that we shouldn't have let slide. And it's not how many mistakes we make or how many we avoid, but rather, are we continuing to struggle? Are we continuing to try to get better at that? And if we are making the struggle, the most important person will notice it, and that's our son. He'll see, okay, it's not that dad doesn't have a temper. It's not that anger is a bad thing. It's that he loves me. He's trying to get me to do the right thing, and sometimes he goes overboard. But you know what? He's trying. He's trying. He's human, and he's trying because he loves me, not because I want to be a good dad, because I love this boy, and he's worth the struggle. I remember, it was probably about 15 years ago, one of the graduates here I can't remember if he was the salutatorian or valedictorian, but he was giving his speech at graduation, and I don't remember any part of his talk except for this anecdote. He was talking about his dad, how much he looked up to his dad, how much he owed to his dad at this moment in his life. And he told the story of how he got into a really bad accident. This boy got into a really bad accident that was totally his fault. And, he was kind of nervous too, but he got up the courage to call his dad. Called his dad. And how calm, patient, collected the dad was, oh, I can't believe, what did you do? What were you doing wrong? But just, are you okay, son? Okay, I'm coming to get you. I'll be there in a second. And that meant so much to him that not only did it have an internal impact on him, but he felt it important to share to everyone at his graduation. Incidentally, I was chatting with that dad years later, and he said, well, the car was a real crappy car. So, made that one easy. But we got to strive. This is a virtue that we're not going to knock out of the park, but we're striving for it. We're trying to get better every day. And they're knowing that we can fail, continuing to struggle, is what's going to be one of the main reasons that they keep coming back to us, that they keep having this relationship with us. The phone that Alvaro was talking about, having that phone, well, they'll call more if they know that we're going to be okay with their failures. We're not going to be okay with their failures, but they can tell us about their failures, and we're not going to overreact. And that's a huge thing. It's going to be something that they'll keep coming back for our affection, for our fatherly advice, for the love and the trust that all of us, sons and fathers, need in this life. So, thank you.